Good morning, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Marla Billinghurst and I will be chairing the meeting this morning. To my left is Miss Linda McFadden and to my far left is Mr. Marcel Lorendo. The assessor this morning representing the city is Mr. Rob Lucky and our recording secretary is Ms. Michelle Neepin. I would like to state that we will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in or they may affirm. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the other applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Please swear everybody in. I do not. That's the one thing missing from the pencil case.
Okay. Sorry. Do you affirm or swear? Can you state your full name, please?
Robert Allen Lucky.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Do you swear? Okay. Can you state your full name, please?
Trevor Glenn Smith.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
This is getting ready now.
Okay, I'm just gonna hold 1 minute till you get back. These. Right, the first matter we will be hearing this morning is 101 Marion Street.
Okay.
Should you not refer to the liability and the amount of assessed value and classification on this one? Challenging all three?
Not for, when the application was made by the ownership, we were appointed afterwards and they had appealed all 3 points on every property, I believe, that was submitted at that time. So we're not disputing classification or liability.
Can you withdraw them?
I can withdraw those, yes.
Okay, I'll write the forms and then I'll give you to sign them.
Okay.
Thank you.
you. Oh, sorry about that, over here.
No problem, Mr. Assessor, please go ahead with your presentation.
Oh, sorry. So the 1010 Powers and 270 St. John's we're not dealing with?
I have
No,
to take
they're-
the
Those are
withdrawal.
withdrawn.
Okay, gotcha. That's what threw me off. I'm looking at the
Oh,
list
Yeah.
here.
You
I
know-
couldn't remember which ones you said you weren't doing. Okay, thanks. I'm getting up to speed here slowly. 101 Marion Street is file number 191766. The roll number is 1609078. 0000. We have 101 Marion Street. I call this one of Manitoba Housing's larger properties. It was built in 1973. It's 16 stories, and it's on Marion, right across from the Norwood Hotel. So just as you come into St. Boniface, I think of it as a signature building. But there's, as I said, 16 stories, 210 suites. They're up to date on returns, and on page 3, these types of properties have typically 80% bachelor units. They were built in the early 70s as seniors housing, and so this one has 179 bachelors, 31 bedrooms, and 1 2-bedroom. The 2-bedroom typically would be the caretaker's suite. I don't think we need to get into this too far. We're lower in NOI. The difference is cap rates. And we have sorry, these pages aren't numbered very well, but I used a bunch of comparables for rents of seniors. As I said, we would accept Stevenson's NOI of $780. On page 5, we have our model cap rates, and page 5A we have some actual examples of cap rates. We have the income and expense statements. The Manitoba housing projects, these are geared to income, so that people pay with ability to pay, so their rent isn't necessarily and not usually market. And expenses, same kind of thing. We have sometimes really large numbers, and sometimes really small numbers. So we value these on the model. So I've put in here, and we might end up referring these to these other pages towards the end later. And the first example is the first page right after the income and expense statement. There was a CBC article about the sale of 185 Smith Street. And 185 Smith Street was Manitoba Housing's largest project. When I worked for Crown Lands, I appraised it several times. They had been trying to redevelop it or look at different ways of reusing it. And in the end, it ended up selling. But when it sold for $16.2 million, it was actually gutted, flooded, it had all kinds of serious problems, and is deemed surplus and sold to a private apartment block owner. As I said, for $16.2 million prior to the reference here. And as a gutted building, that relates to $43,432 per unit for the 373 units. And then the last 2 pages is a sale of 300 Selkirk, which is obviously on Selkirk near Main Street. And this was, or could be, is the Polish seniors, high-rise, Manitoba housing. Same scenario, 80% bachelors, and that building was sold just before the reference date, transferred right after the reference date. And we were given the appraisal for it, and anyway, the appraisal was for the sale, and it sold for, on Selkirk, $48,800 a unit. It needed a lot of work, and the professional appraiser that did the appraisal used a cap rate of 4.75 to arrive at the value of that. So on the rate of, on the issue of cap rates, you know, do we have perfect cap rate sales for every property? No. But we have market information, we have returns from purchasers telling us 4.5 to 5.5 caps, or how they're buying the buildings. We have appraisers evidence, we have market evidence from Colliers and whatnot. So our modelers, as well as we look at actual cap rate sales. So we put together and we have meetings about cap rates, and in the end we were quite confident that our cap rates were very indicative of the marketplace. So I would ask that for this property you would use the actual of Mr. Smith and our cap rate, and but maintain the assessment. Last go round, 2018, the assessment was $14,158,000, and it was confirmed at the border revision at that amount. So that's all I have to say on this property.
Thank you very much. Questions for the assessment?
Yes, last go round, the property is represented by a different agency, is that correct?
It was represented by Altus.
Right. And was that decision appealed to the municipal board?
No.
It wasn't? Okay, that's interesting. Looking at, somewhat facetiously, I'm willing to accept the city's NOI.
Of course you are.
And our capitalization rate if the board decides to go in that direction. But let's move on from there. For the properties today, given workload, were you able to inspect the properties? I'm assuming that's...
I've been in this building before. I represented it for Manitoba Housing many years ago. Contested hearing at the municipal board, but that was quite a few years ago. That was 15 years ago maybe.
Okay, so sometime...
So I haven't been in it recently.
And just generally for all of the properties, is it the same situation? You've seen all of these, or
I'm familiar with all of them. If I've been in them, it hasn't been recent.
Okay. And sorry, you had said that you were representing Manitoba Housing at that time against the city, is that correct? You were disputing the value in favor of Manitoba Housing?
Well, when I worked for the province, Manitoba Housing had never at that point reviewed their assessments, so we reviewed them and appealed where necessary. We worked with the assessment department mostly, and corrected them where necessary.
I see. Okay, so looking at the brief here, cap rate is our differential here. So you have a 5.1% capitalization rate. That's in the middle of roughly in the middle of your 4.9 to 5.3, the 20th to 80th percentile of cap rates in the city study.
I believe so.
And as you had mentioned, the subject property as a Manitoba housing property has roughly 80% bachelors as they developed them at that time. Would that be a standard type of market apartment building out in the marketplace with that high a percentage of bachelors?
That's,
Or would that be kind of specific to Manitoba housing itself?
not just Manitoba housing. There's other seniors groups and buildings that are very similar. The 320 Sherbrooke is a former Manitoba housing building. The comparables I have here, that's the Lions Manor. It would be almost the exact same building. It says they're 300 square feet because it's a little bit older, that building. 610 Portage is a newer 1983 seniors building, and they're all smaller one-bedrooms, but
not bachelors.
right, there's other groups. They were either not market rents or geared to income, so we didn't use them. But
Okay.
the foresters groups and different seniors. When they were built in the 70s, they were intended to house as many seniors as possible.
Right. Yeah, that was the structure. They were trying to accommodate as many residents as possible in the space available, correct?
Right.
Okay. I have two pieces of rebuttal evidence. I'm not sure how you'd like to deal with those, when you want to. Madam Chair?
Yes, you might as well, if they're,
It's for the whole docket today, essentially, aside from the one piece, which is
Okay.
specific to this.
so if they pertain to this, you might as well.
Okay. So here's a bunch of
Okay,
copies.
so then I'll have extra from
Yeah,
you.
hopefully. So, I'll get you to flip to the city's brief on page 5A. And the multifamily chart that is there. Pardon me. Actually, let's start on page 5, just ever so briefly. If you look at the second paragraph of the document there on page 5, it states that, essentially states that the City of Winnipeg Assessment Department income producing models follows the IAAO standards. So the cap rates then on page 5A, the multifamily section there in the chart. I'll get you to open my rebuttal brief there. May I take all of those back? Thank you. So the first part of this rebuttal here is IAAO, International Association of Assessing Officers document, standard on verification and adjustment of sales. And I will direct you to I believe it's 5.10 property characteristic changes. And if we flip into the document, it's numbered 13 at the bottom of the document. And if you go to the top of that page, it has 5.10 property characteristic changes. And I'll just quote from this briefly. So it states, sales data files should reflect the physical characteristics of the property when sold. For ratio studies, if significant physical changes have occurred to the property between the date of sale and the appraisal date, valuation date, the sale should not be included. Following that, it also says,
I'm sorry, I'm completely lost.
Page 13.
so I'm sorry, this,
document.
Okay.
see this page
So-
13 down here at the bottom?
Yeah, so you're reading, where again?
Top right, left-hand corner, 5.10 property characteristic
Okay.
changes. Okay. So, the third sentence there, following, so it states, for ratio studies, if significant physical changes have occurred to the property between the date of sale and the appraisal date, valuation date, the sale should not be included. Following this, it says, the sale may still be valid for mass appraisal modeling by matching the sale price to the characteristics that existed on the date of sale. So, the point of this is that if a property is, if a multifamily property is purchased, renovated, and has their income increased for that property, that sale should not be included in the valuation model because it doesn't meet the standards, because it has been changed. The change is not just physical. In the case of income-producing properties, it's the return on the property. The income is adjusted, so obviously you'd have a significantly different cap rate for that property versus what it may have been at the time of sale because of that change to the income producing ability of that property through the renovation. The adjustment part that they're referring to there, now if you read that, it tends to be looking at single family dwellings and their examples, but if you look at this, it's saying if you were to match the sale price to the characteristics that existed on the date of sale. So that means you would need to adjust that sale, which would mean that you would need to adjust the income for that sale to match what the renovated condition of that property would be, which would change obviously what the cap rate would be. So that's what the IAAO standard states with regard to validity of sales or verification and adjustment of sales. So looking at the first three properties in the chart on City of Winnipeg's 5A there, 191 Roche, 394 Talbot, and 285 Maxwell. Each of these properties was purchased with the intent to renovate and was subsequently renovated, and their income was significantly lifted. So,
Can I just interrupt here? It's kind of misleading, like.
well, I'm still stating my evidence
Okay.
here. at
You'll
this
have a
point in
chance to
time.
ask questions.
Okay.
So, back to where we were. Again, the intent with regard to each of these first three properties was for the properties to be purchased, renovated, and the return to the investor increased through increasing the income through the renovation process. So any cap rate that would have been produced on that is either shouldn't be included in the first place or should be adjusted to represent what that future income of that property as of the valuation date would be in order to derive a cap rate. But then that would be a speculative cap rate at that point, so it's not, really they should not be included in the first place. The evidence that you have in the rest of the brief following that is the publicly available information with regard to each of these sales. 191 Roche, we have the sales mailer. You can see if you look down towards the bottom of this page, number 16, did you or did you intend to make major repairs or improvements to the property? Yes. And those repairs or renovations were suite upgrades. Following that, if you flip 2 pages on, you can see the low level of the rental rates for that property at the time of purchase. So clearly it was purchased for repositioning in the market. Following property is 394 Talbot. Again, publicly available information here. You can see in the page numbered 14 at the bottom there, it states, and this is the property management for that property, that the intent was to renovate for the property, and that they're increasing they will be increasing the rent for the property. Following page gives you the low level of rent in the property at the time of purchase, and following that you can see the increased rent on page number 16. So a 1-bed went from $537 a month up to $800 per month following renovation. And then the final page, 285 Maxwell, final 2 pages. Again, publicly available information. It states that the property was purchased with the intent to renovate, was subsequently renovated to kitchens and bathrooms, and that they're increasing their rents over a 3-year period. And you can again see the initial low level of the rents for that property. The final property there, 333 Ward, has been talked about endlessly in front of the Board of Revision. There's been an affidavit presented on behalf of the purchaser of the property to the Board of Revision that they purchased it based on a 5.5% cap rate. I believe it was before the board yesterday for appeal in the 2020 cycle by the owner's agent. Evidence that the 5.44% cap rate is accurate has been presented to the board numerous times. So the point of this is that for the cap rates that are presented here, we're not looking at cap rates that A, should be included in the model, and B, are not truly representative of what, they're not true cap rates. They're based on information that the property was not purchased upon, so they give you an artificially low cap. I'm happy to answer questions on that.
Okay, let me step back for 1 minute.
Sure.
Because I would like to give the board an opportunity to question you on your evidence, and then we will move on to the rebuttal,
Sure.
just so we don't get off
I
track.
just didn't
Absolutely.
So,
Keep
you've
it
already
track.
asked the assessor questions on his evidence,
I
and that's how the rebuttal came up. So, Mr. Lorendo, do you have questions for the assessor on his evidence?
Just on the Lions Place, Lions Manor, is that building assessed the same as any other apartment building is assessed?
I'm sorry, what was it?
On your Lions Manor, you showed Bachelor Suites at 590, 1 bedroom 795. It's on your 4E
Right.
and your 4D. So is that, are you using the same type of evaluation on this building as you are on this one today?
Yes.
You sure?
Unless there's carry units in there, but
There it is.
on which one? 320?
On Lions Manor.
Right, 320, sure. There's carry units in there, and they could be valued differently, but I'm specifically talking about typical apartments, the bachelors and the 1 bedrooms. There's a care home attached. I'm not 100% up to speed on that building exactly, but typically, we do seniors buildings the same. We use market rent, market expense, like we're doing here.
Got no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McFadden?
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Now, do you have questions?
I do.
Rebuttal, okay.
And I do have the one further piece of rebuttal when it comes to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so on your page 11, 191 Roach. I'm trying to keep all this straight, I got a lot of paper going here, but if you would have read further on, the standards says the renovations have to be significant.
I did read further on.
Okay, so on page 11, they state the renovations. Suite upgrades, 100,000. And the question would be, is $100,000 significant on a building $3,610,000? That's
Right, so, to answer your question, the document that you're looking there is the sales questionnaire that needs to be completed upon purchase. So, any amount that they're putting down there is an estimate, so I don't know
Right.
if they spent 100,000 or 400,000 on their renos, but.
so it could have been less or more than 100,000.
Yes, but, and I certainly take your point that they have to be significant, and I understand that. The point of the suite upgrades is that if the upgrades are such that they're, you know, focused on, say, the kitchen and the bathroom, the parts that generate or easily generate more revenue in rent, it can be significant, yes.
So how many suites are in 191 Roach?
I'm not sure if it states on the document how many suites are there, and in fact,
Oh, sorry, actually,
as
I have.
noted, I don't represent this, this tenant, this was publicly available information.
Okay, so then what you've included here is our return. Page 12 says that they bought the place with a 5% cap rate.
It does state
Isn't
that,
that
yes.
significant?
Well, that, again, it's not my client, and I would assume that they bought it based on a 5% cap on the in-place revenue,
Right.
which is not what they were purchasing the property for, and would not be what it would be as a valuation rate.
Well, if we're stating what they purchased it for, we're just speculating.
Well, when they state that they intended to renovate it and upgrade it, that's what their intent was.
Oh, on the point of 333 Ward, can I give these out? We actually have the decisions.
Will that be introducing new evidence now?
I guess it's rebuttal. He claimed that the owner used 5.5 cap. I can give you the decision on 333 Ward, it's 5.25. Based on the evidence that was given at the hearing, I mean, I can give out decisions, but, or I could talk to them. The
Okay,
decision.
well, I guess if you're telling us that it was 5.25.
It was 5.25.
And that's fine.
And the
We can
evidence
take that as
presented by
verbally from
the
you.
owner's agent was that the sale price divided by the NOI was 5.23%. He talked about 5.5, but couldn't substantiate it. And there was no sworn affidavits from the owner saying, they said they could be efficiencies, but I sat here on Tuesday looking at the owner's agent, and it was 18 million divided by the NOI came to 5.23, and the decision is 5.25.
Okay. Thank you.
May I respond to that?
Sure.
Yes,
Okay.
it was a question.
So, just to clarify, so, and I understand you were in the hearing, and I'm not in any way trying to be misleading. I just spoke to the owner's agent outside of the hallway here. The affidavit that I was referring to from the purchaser was not presented this year. They presented it in the 2018 cycle, as this particular property became a fairly large issue in the 2018 Board of Revisions, and they had presented an affidavit at that time. Perhaps he didn't do it in the 2020, I'm not aware of that. And he did point, I guess perhaps in the hearing he used 5.25 in his evidence as the cap rate that he was seeking, but his knowledge from his owner, who he works for directly, is that it was purchased based on 5.45, 5.5% cap rate because there were efficiencies to be gained. There was an on-site manager and a caretaker on-site that was unnecessary in their operation of the building. So their purchase of the property reduced the expenditures and boosted the NOI, and it was bought at a 5.5 cap. That was what I was getting at. So no intent to mislead with regard to the hearing on Tuesday or whenever it was in this cycle.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think I have anything else.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lorenzo?
And you'll have to forgive me, Mr. Smith, but I'm still trying to understand a lot of this stuff about cap rates. I'm
Certainly.
still in the learning process. The rate, let's just take the Roche property just as an example, seeing as everybody's talked about it.
Certainly.
If they would have gone in with a 6% cap, would they have had to put more money down and a smaller mortgage because of the bank taking it as a higher risk?
Would they have to have put more money down on
the
the
purchase.
purchase? Sometimes it works that way. Generally, lenders, if you're buying in more socially disadvantaged areas, sometimes their lending practices are such that you do have to put a bit more money down up front. So that, I'm not aware of whether that happened on that property or not, as I don't represent the owner, but that can be the case, yes.
If you look at it, 25% down is all he had to put down.
Right.
And he mortgaged 75% using the cap percent. The bank would have used that 5% cap rate, would they not?
Well, typically there'd be
As far as
an
risk.
appraisal provided to the bank, and if that's what the appraisal said and they were in agreement, then I guess that's what they would have used. But I'm not party to that information.
So are appraisals for banks different than appraisals that you do?
Are they different? Well, their appraisals can be done for a number of different purposes, I guess. So if you're purchasing a multifamily property with the intent to renovate, your appraisal would have a number of extraordinary assumptions and exceptions noted within it, such that you were making you were basing your value. You may do a value as is for the property and a value as renovated. So based on the renovated value of the property and what the property would produce at that point. So yes, in that way, they can certainly be different.
So then the renovated property would then have a lower cap rate because it'd be less risk, would it not?
The renovated property would have a lower cap rate at that point in time, yes, in its renovated. Lower, lower than, so, let me think about what you're saying and not just be off the cuff. So, whatever the property was purchased at and whatever the resultant cap rate from that is, again, is not a true cap rate because they're not buying that income, they're buying the future. So the cap rate for the future would be representative of what that property would be in the marketplace. So it would be a renovated property, assuming it would be in good condition, it would be, you know, in your average cap rate range.
Higher rents.
Higher rents, yes.
Higher rents would drop cap rate down, would it not?
On that initial purchase price, but that's not what the property is worth at that point in time. It's worth a higher amount, so your cap rate is obviously.
So is that not why we, when we're evaluating a property, we have to take into consideration the position it's in today?
That's exactly correct. You're looking at the position that it sits in today as of the valuation date, not what the property can become at a later date.
So the evidence that's provided to us should tell us the condition of the property today versus,
Versus in the future, yes.
okay, I'm done.
Right, Ms. McFadden?
I don't have any further questions.
I don't have any questions about your rebuttal evidence, so would you like to proceed with your?
I would, I just have, again,
Oh, right,
this
the
is
further
second piece,
rebuttal.
and I'm aware
Okay,
time is
yeah.
passing here, so I'll try and be very brief with this.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's just with regard to the last 2 pages of the city's brief for 101 Marion here, the last couple of pages. Did I give you the wrong one?
She gave me one.
There you go. My mistake.
That's okay.
So, the very first page here
Thank you.
is in reference to 300 Selkirk, so it's the very last page of the city's brief. Pardon me. And this property was transferred from Manitoba Housing to the Winnipeg Housing Rehabilitation Corporation, I believe is the name of it. And it is the Canadian Polish Manor, and it is a seniors property essentially on Selkirk. So if you look at the highlighted portion there for monthly rent, you can see that this is a rent geared to income property. So the revenue that this property would generate, as with all Manitoba housing properties or many other social housing properties, is considerably lower than market. So the capitalization rate that's developed on the last page here of 4.75% cap rate, I'm not sure what that's based on, but I don't believe that it can be based on the actual revenue of the property as it is rent geared to income. And the second page of my rebuttal there is with regard to the 185 Smith property. So I was involved with appeals on this property. They actually had 2 floods for this property. They had an initial flood and they had to replace a bunch of their mechanical equipment in the basement area and a few other things. It then flooded again, and they had to evacuate, take out all of the tenants, and subsequently they had to replace all of that mechanical equipment. And once the decision to sell the property was taken, they went through the exercise of gutting the interior of all asbestos and items of that nature so that it would be in a more saleable condition. So, and they had upgraded upgraded the electrical at that time too. So when the property was purchased, a lot of the downside had been removed. The mechanical had been replaced, electrical was upgraded, and the asbestos was gone. So they were kind of buying, what the purchaser was buying was a development property. They're not buying a set income. They're buying their ability to change this building, which is what they're subsequently doing. If you flip through that article, you can see that or through my article rather, you can see that they're significantly renovating the building, and if you go by it now, you can also see that happening. They're reducing the number of units from 383, most of which are bachelor, down to roughly 280 units. And the rents obviously will be considerably higher. Quite a number of these units are going to be kind of 2-floor units where there's an upper loft area, and there's going to be new glazing and commercial on the main floor and a number of things like that. So the purchase of the property is representative of, again, what the property is going to become in the future, which is a considerably nicer property. That's it as far as my rebuttal goes. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lucky, do you have questions?
Oh, I just wanted to clarify on that. The last page, where it says 4.75 cap, that isn't the sale price cap. That in the appraisal is the cap rate that the appraiser used to value the building. So he used comparable cap rates and deemed for this building the most appropriate cap rate would be 4.75. And the same thing as Smith Street. The sale isn't intended to show a cap rate because there would be no way to arrive at an income on it. But just to show that somebody for a shell paid 40 some odd thousand.
Do you have a question, that's
No, that's why I just wanted to.
Question about the rebuttal evidence you
I just wanted to clarify that. The
Okay,
statement.
we're asking questions, but do you have a question specifically?
Well, understood. Now I see what
Oh.
you were intending.
The statement was that there was a cap rate based on the sale of 4.75, but I'm just saying that wasn't accurate.
Okay. I
That's all.
understand.
That's all I have.
Mr. Miranda, do you have any questions?
No.
Ms. McFadden?
Do you know whether the subsidies for 300 Selkirk went with the building?
Do I know
The
which one?
subsidies? If this is continuing to be a rent gear to income building, obviously the subsidies.
I don't know, as they're not my client at this point, but I would assume that the subsidies would carry forward. Because it's still under, well, it's Winnipeg Housing Rehabilitation Corporation is the new ownership group. And they operate similarly to housing and some other agencies, but I can't be certain of that.
Thank you.
Okay, I have no questions on this. Okay, so we're done with the rebuttal. So let's, please proceed with your presentation on
Thank
this
you very
property.
much. All right, so 101 Marion, as noted, we do end up differing a little bit in NOI, but I'm not going to go through the rent in any great detail or those other details. We can summarize fairly quickly, I think. If you look at my page number 3, there's some detail in the chart here for you. Again, property was built in 1973 by Manitoba Housing for provision of affordable housing to the marketplace. You're looking at 179 out of 210 units being bachelor units, a relatively small size. The Property's operated on a rent geared to income basis, so we can't rely on the revenue generated for determining a market value for the property. The point with the suite count with 179 units out of 210 units is that, again, this is not, this is a very unusual suite mix in the marketplace. It's not terribly desirable as it stands for the marketplace. Typically, you're looking at a normal split between 1 and 2 bedrooms, maybe with a few bachelors thrown in. But when you have roughly 80+% bachelor units in a project, it's not in high demand in the marketplace from purchasers. Moving on to the building itself, page number 4, 16-story apartment. As you can see, there's the split there. There is a 2-bedroom unit that's occupied by the caretaker. The main floor has a large common area, which includes a large common room, an office for property management, and an intake office for Manitoba Housing itself near the front entryway, and a meeting room. So you have all of these significant common area spaces that you wouldn't typically find in your average apartment building. The suites themselves are older and dated, older finishes and furnishings with considerable deterioration. They do have an ongoing bed bug issue. This is not unusual in the market. I'm just pointing it out, which they do treat on a regular basis. And we can look at the photos of the property beginning on page number 5 there. So some exteriors, then you get into the interior. You can see kind of the institutional type of finishes in the hallway. You get into the suites themselves. You can see the original cabinetry and some damage to them. Original flooring, bathrooms, etc. So it's pretty straightforward in terms of condition. It would be below average in terms of condition. The site is shown on page 10 and the location on page 11, and we can move into the valuation. We based our revenue for the property on CMHC market averages less a deduction for condition and size. And this gives us our revenue of $1,627,225 as shown on page number 14. They actually brought in roughly half that on rent geared to income of $809,000. Looking at vacancy, 3.4% for bachelors in Transcona. We're using a rate of 2.5%. And again, that's 85% of the building. The expenses for the building are stabilized at the bottom of page 15 there, and you can see that we do that over a 3-year time horizon. And we can move on to cap rate itself. So you've probably all heard this numerous times. So again, I'll try and be brief, and we're only going to do this once today.
We appreciate that, thank you.
As the majority of these are all social housing properties today. The point of the text at the top of page number 16 is that you cannot base a cap rate for a social housing property directly on cap rates of normal market apartments out there. Very quickly, social affordable housing properties cannot legitimately be compared to standard market apartment transactions, as they have considerable restrictions and burdens that are not present on market apartments. And if you look a little further down, there's an expert in the field of affordable housing out of the States. He's an accredited appraiser, Mr. Richard Polton. He has a book on affordable housing, and his statement is, developing a market-derived cap rate for an income-restricted property begins with an analysis of the available rates for similar unrestricted properties. Then these rates are adjusted based on the risk factors that an investor would consider in developing a cap rate. The result is a cap rate based on market factors and associated risks. In the final analysis, Property tax assessment must take into account the public purpose of the project, the overall benefits and burdens, and the restricted nature of the operating rents. So again, he's stating the same thing. If you look at the chart on page number 16, these are all market transactions where the cap rate derived was based on purchase of the property for the in-place income. They were not purchased for repositioning or renovation within the market. So we're looking again at a low of 5.44% at 333 Ward, up to 6.65% on Balmoral, with a concentration between 5.5% and 6% roughly. The market participants are essentially saying that capitalization rates for multifamily have been stable between the last cycle and this cycle. We give you both Colliers and C.B. Richard Ellis, and as you can see, the Colliers information for low-rise apartments in Winnipeg is saying 5.25% to 6% in 2016 and 5.5% to 6% in 2018. And if you look at C.B. Richard Ellis, their stats are 5.5% to 6%. And 5.75% to 6% over both 2016 and 18 for the two categories that they break the low rises out into. So looking at subject property, again, we have a property in relatively dated condition with significant deferred maintenance, 85% bachelor units on the market. If you were to purchase this this property and keep it in its current its current configuration, 85% bachelors would certainly impact what you would be willing to pay for that, as your return on bachelors is going to be considerably less. And we have all of the other impacts of social housing with regard to risk for a purchaser, that being limited rental pool, lack of a reserve fund, disposition restrictions, etc. You have tenants in there that would have the right to carry forward under their current structure as their lease term exists. As noted at the bottom of page number 18 in the C.B. Richard Ellis information, you can see that capitalization rates for multifamily, as they're stating it, appear to be relatively flat between that 2014 up to 2018 period. So we have used a cap rate of 6.5% in our analysis, and this gives us a final market value of $12,001,000. The addendum materials include the income and expense, the market reports as included in the report, and then we have decisions on similar properties before the board revision in the 2020 cycle. Most of these are Manitoba Housing. The first one, 100 Charles Walk, 6.5% capitalization rate in the decision. 711 Dufferin, 6.5% capitalization in the decision. 45 Stadacona, 6.25%. 130 Tuxedo Avenue, 6% cap rates. 11 Dorset was a 6% cap rate. 81 Tyndall was a 6% cap rate. Those are cooperatives. 355 Sutton is again Manitoba Housing.
And
That was 6%.
We
I'll
don't
leave
look
it
at
there.
old decisions.
That's fine.
Sorry, decisions.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky, do you have questions for the applicants?
On page 16 of your report, your cap rate sales. of these 7 sales, would sales 2 to 7 be the same type of purchaser that would buy a $12 million building? Like, the only one that's same scope as one, isn't it?
In terms of the magnitude of the building, yeah, one would be certainly the largest sale out there.
Okay, no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lorenzo?
No questions?
Ms. McFadden?
I have no questions.
Yeah, no questions. Thank you.
And I appreciate your patience, and I will not cover that material more than once,
Thank you.
Probably could if you want.
unless Mr. Lucky wants to.
I do.
Sure, I will take a 5-minute break, yes. We will call the meeting back to order. The next property is 156 Thomas Berry Street. Mr. Assessor, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. 156 Thomas Berry is its file number 19-3374, roll number 060-700-97100. And we have a 1977 two-story. 16 suites, and looks like our model is right on. Our NOIs are pretty much matched. Difference is cap rate, and the 4.5% cap rate, our theory is, well, our cap rate's, it's age and size, and it's a sliding scale. So before we used to have these big drop-offs. If you hit a certain age, the cap rates would drastically change. Now they don't. It's like tenths, and based on the size of this property, we have a lot of our modeling, and assessors found there's a large pool of prospective purchasers for small buildings, and they sold for very low cap rates. So this one, the 4.5% cap rate's applicable, and I've seen 4.5 reported to us by purchasers on returns. So I'm confident that that's an accurate cap rate, and again, if our model is giving us accurate income and expenses, the cap rates are accurate as well. So I would ask that you maintain the assessment of $1,524,000. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Smith, do you have questions?
I do
Mr.
not have
Lucky?
any questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lorenzo?
Only the one question, and that's on the age that you were talking about. Wasn't it 1980 that they started doing more energy efficient buildings? This one was prior to that. Didn't that affect part of the cap rate previously? After 1980, they started doing it too.
75, we had a drop, or a difference in cap rates. There's been, had so many different cap rates. I honestly can't remember. But since 1977, this building looks like it's had a new envelope. I don't have any, but I mean, the stucco looks newer. I don't have any permits. Don't know exactly.
Okay, nothing else.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden?
I have no questions.
Okay, neither do I. Okay, thank you. Please
Thank you.
proceed.
All right, so 156 Thomas Berry Street. You flip to my page number 3, just inside there's some background for you. Looking at the appeal history of the property, you can see that in 2018, the assessed value was reduced with board revision from $1,561,000 to $834,000. Subsequently, we're looking at an increase of 83% from that value up to $1,524,000. Our value for the property is, our market value for the property is $1,306,000, and then again, that's based on the detail included here. This is a more conventional property for Manitoba, not for Manitoba housing, but in the marketplace. Built in 1977, as stated, 2 1-bedroom units, 14 2-bedroom units. You can see the exterior on the front there, and there's some pictures of the interior here, so clearly it has had renovation done in somewhat recent time. They've done a refresh of the property, and therefore, looking at the property, there would be no further potential to increase the revenue for the property if you were to purchase the property. The site is shown on page number 8 and the location on page 9. It's well positioned in that it's in St. Boniface and somewhat close to the St. Boniface Hospital. So it is certainly in good condition and in a decent location. So looking at the remainder of the valuation, we were not in disagreement with the NOI that the city arrived at for the property. We're only disputing capitalization rate. So as noted, it's a more conventional split of suites. It has been renovated. It is in a good location, etc. So this property would be different than the majority of Manitoba housing properties that we would see on the marketplace. It's still in good condition as well. You do see the situation where properties are renovated by Manitoba Housing and then within 6 months they're not in such great condition anymore on the inside. That's not the case for this one. So for those reasons, we would see the subject property trading towards the lower end of the capitalization rate range. We do recognize that it's 16 suites and as noted, in good condition, well located. The cap rate ranges from the main market participants are in that 5 to 6% range, 5.5 to 6% range. We feel this one, given the quality of it, would draw a cap rate of 5.25%. Looking at the city's cap rate of 4.5%, and perhaps I didn't mention this in my initial discussion, one of the points of discussing the capitalization rates that are included in the city's brief are such that if sales such as that should not be included in the ratio study, are included in the ratio study, then that's going to skew the model somewhat, and you'll get 4% and 4.5% cap rates. So I know in the marketplace, lenders are not lending on cap rates in the 4.5% range for in-place revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky, you have questions?
Sorry, just. No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Mr. Orlando?
None.
Ms. McFadden?
I have none.
Nor do I? Okay. Great. The next property on the docket is 30 Winford Drive. Mr. Lucky, please proceed when you are ready.
Oh, sorry.
Did I get that right? All right, yeah.
Yeah, I
Oh,
pulled that
okay.
out already,
Oh.
so I just put it back.
That's,
You gotta be patient.
no, that you had me second. I'm like, okay, maybe.
Sorry. File number 19-3382, roll number 0900377100, 30 Winford Drive, I believe is in St. Hotel. And we have a 1988 four-story 48 suite multifamily property. On page 3, we have a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms, very typical apartment building, modern, built in '88, and our NOIs are much the same, if not the same. Difference again is cap rate and just building. Sorry, just bear with me for a second.
Take your time.
Oh, sorry, no, it's in Transcona. I thought it was Canterbury Park. Okay, yeah, sorry. It's actually in newer part of Transcona, east end. Any event, it's a modern building in a modern area, and typical apartment building. I would ask that you maintain our valuation of assessment of $5,231,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, do you have questions for Mr. Lucky?
I do not have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lorendo?
No,
Ms. McFadden?
No, I don't have it.
Nor do I. Okay, well, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. So as noted already, the property is located in Transcona at 30 Winford Drive. The site description is on my page number 9. This gives you an aerial of the property. And then the actual location is shown on page number 10, giving you that location within Transcona. Page number 3 just gives you a bit of detail with regard to the property. Again, this is Manitoba Housing, operated on a rent geared to income basis, so we can't rely on the in-place rent. And the suite mix is shown at the bottom of the page there, 26 one-bedroom units and 22 22 two-beds, for a total of 48 units, built in 1988. There's some pictures following this of the property. You can see the exteriors and exterior parking area, and then we get into the property itself. And again, yes, it's in a somewhat newer area of Transcona, but housing builds their housing builds their properties essentially where there's a need for Manitoba housing, and the finishes that they use are intended to be of a baseline level, but lasting essentially. So if you look at the hallways, you can see the somewhat institutional nature of the build out, and then we get into the units. You can see the type of flooring that is in the property, in the individual units themselves. Some of the wear and tear that has occurred here, you can see some damages to the furnishings, etc. Also on page number 8 for the cabinetry in the kitchen, it is of that 1988 vintage, so again, this is, it's not a 1950 building, but there's been no renovation to this property since 1988, so the finishes are from that time frame. Looking at the valuation itself, the rents that we apply to the property are based on CMHC averages. If you look at my page number 13, you can see how those were derived. We come up to $609,912. The actual revenue produced for the property was a little over $250,000, so of course we don't rely on that in-place rent here to income. The 3% vacancy rate is certainly applicable for the subject property, so we have used that. And our stabilized expense allowance is shown at the bottom of page number 14. Again, we run through a 3-year history for you and go through a stabilization process to come up with the expense allowance that's utilized. It's not based on a percentage. Moving on to the capitalization rate. I'm not going to run through that material again. Let's just think of the subject property. So, as noted, it is in Transcona. The issues that arise on the sale of tenanted Manitoba housing or social housing properties, one of them being that you have residents that are in place under a certain structure, and they would have the legal right to carry forward for a period of time under that existing rental scheme, essentially. So any purchaser would look at that in examining the purchase of the property. Looking at the wear and tear of the property, etc., we would place the cap rate for a property such as this at the top end of the normal range, that being 6% for the subject property. So we applied a 6% cap rate. And this gives us our final market value of $4,371,000. And again, that 6% is in keeping with the major market participants as well as our cap rate study as shown. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky, do you have questions?
This suite with damage. Is it just the one suite you took pictures of?
It's not, no, we had inspected a couple of units in the property, and we always make it clear that we need to show the normalized condition of the property, so we don't just show one single unit. So it's not all damaged, I'm not saying it is, there are some that are not, and if you look at the photos, not all of it is damaged.
Right.
So
somebody got mad and kicked in this door, but it's not typical.
well, and that's the point, is it's more typical in Manitoba housing properties, just given the needs that they're meeting and providing housing. It does tend to be have a lot more wear and tear on their properties. If you look at the kitchen cabinetry, you can see missing drawers as well as damage in the bathroom. Now, again, it's not all a single unit. We make sure that we are not showing you the absolute worst or the absolute best. We want to show the property as it is on average.
Okay, so this will be a question. It'll take a while to get to it.
That's fine.
So based on these pictures, it looks like, and from what you're saying, this building needs some renovation, maintenance.
It would need repair to some of the suites is what I'm saying, yeah.
So your rebuttal to our cap rate sales was the buildings that needed or were gonna be updated, our cap rates were too low. Because they were gonna get renovations, our cap rates at 4 and 4.5% are not indicative of buildings that are renovated. So wouldn't the same follow here, that if this isn't a prime renovated building, the cap rate should be lower than average, because there's room for an improvement?
So, I take your point. I certainly understand the argument being put forward there. And the point is that we're not valuing the potential of any of these properties today. We're valuing the property in its current state as of the valuation date, not what one could turn that property into through renovation. So the purchase of the property in its current state to continue in its current state would not draw a lower cap rate.
Don't you think that it's a double standard to say when a property under appeal should have a higher cap rate if it's in poor condition and needs to be upgraded, whereas you can't use the lower cap rate sales for properties that were upgraded?
I don't feel it's a double standard because of the point that I had made there, because you're valuing entirely different things. The value that is in question as of the valuation date for assessment is the property as it sits at that time, not what one can turn that property into. So, no, it's not a double standard.
Okay, no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lorendo?
You follow the model for the vacancy, 3%, but you said you used actual at 3%?
No, I didn't say I used actual, just that it would be applicable in that area.
Okay. What were you using as far as the expenses then for your 55.67? Were you using actuals or are you using it's not a model, is it?
No, it's not modeled. That's based on the actuals being stabilized for the valuation date. If you look at page number 14, you
Yeah.
see the 3-year history and how we stabilized that value.
So if you've stabilized that value, you've taken into account the repairs that are needed each year, correct?
We've taken into account the expenses that they have spent on repair and maintenance at that time, yeah.
We would have taken care of these types of doors that were damaged, those types of things. That's, the minor stuff would have been taken care of in that expense, correct?
Correct, yes, yeah.
So would that not be double dipping, bringing the cap rate up to the 6?
No, and again, the point there is that what we're showing is not unusual. So yes, it will have been repaired, but it will continue to operate in that similar fashion, and you'll have similar wear and tear in general with these properties that will have to be repaired. So.
And you'll keep a higher expense ratio there, year after year?
I don't know that it's necessarily higher. But in any case, yeah, there's the wear and tear issue, but that's not the only thing that is impacting the cap rate. As I think we discussed the cap rate
Yeah.
issue there.
Good, we have. Okay,
But I understand, yes, there may be slightly higher repair and maintenance on this property.
yeah. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McFadden?
I don't think I have any further questions.
Nor do I. Okay, thank you. Okay. The next property on the docket is 817 Main Street.
817 Main Street is roll number 19-1765. Roll number 14000885500. another Manitoba Housing, seniors, high-rise 11 stories, built in 1974. So in the peak of construction of these types of properties. Page 3, our income and expense statement. Again, high amount of bachelor suites. They're about 330-40 square feet. But keeping in mind, in 1974, these suites were replacing a bedroom suite in a rooming house. So, you know, this was, people were moving into these places, and this was moving on up.
It's high end.
Yeah, that's right. And they still are. I mean, these buildings are solid brick, or solid concrete. I mean, they can withstand fires inside and all kinds of things. So it's good accommodation for what it's intended for. And by having the bachelor suites, you can put a lot of people in there. And a typical developer could get a lot of rent because it's very dense and high income potential. If you look at our model, it's not model, it's been factored. Our rent, 472, is lower than typically, or often we were using 550 or higher for bachelor, predominantly bachelor apartments. And the expense ratio is 65%, it's obviously been changed. So when we do our percent change reports, we look at as many properties as we can, and we make changes where necessary to make sure that their assessments are appropriate, and 65% is a high expense ratio. The rents are low. This assessment is lower than our poorest. We have different levels, above average, average, below average, poor. So this is below poor in terms of valuation. So we're recognizing that, you know, it's a big secret, 800 block of Maine it's a difficult location. We've recognized that, but we have a modern, solid concrete building that's been hit with everything we can hit it with to get the assessment down to this level, and 3.522 million and $32,000 a unit. For the rent comparables, I didn't run comparables into page 4. Kind of difficult to explain, but I thought what was most appropriate was to go on to the Manitoba Society of Seniors directory for housing. And these are the first one is the subject, 817 Main, and it says it's 30% of your gross income. And then these other properties like 200 McGregor, 480 Charles, 365 Thames, Talbot, Aberdeen. These are all rents in seniors in somewhat comparable areas. Aberdeen is 590, but I mean, you gotta consider that this is also a nonprofit. If it was run by a for-profit owner, the rents could even be higher. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that, you know, this building has been a constant challenge to meet our model, but we've looked at it site-specific, and I can, with confidence, tell you that I think this assessment's more than fair for what's there, and I'd ask that you would maintain the assessment of $3,522,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, you have questions?
Just one question, really. So the cap rate range that the city has for multifamily is a low of 4 and a high of 7.3%. So what property would draw a 7.3% cap rate or 7% towards the higher end?
That would be an older, that would be a property 1945 and older in areas 4 and 7, which loosely is parts of the north end.
Okay. That's my only question.
Thank you. Mr. Lorendo,
No questions.
Ms. McFadden.
No question.
Okay, perfect. Please proceed with your presentation.
Okay, great. So 817 Main Street. Let's just look at my page number 3 to start with. And some background on the property. Property was appealed in the 2018 assessment cycle and was reduced from $3,868,000 down to $2,553,000. The property has since been increased for the 2020 assessment to $3,522,000. So under what the original 2018 assessment was, but still a 38% increase in value from the revised 2018 assessment for the property. Our market value for the property for the 2020 cycle is $2,935,000. Looking at the subject property, location is critical to these things, as well as condition, etc. And I'll just take you to my page number 10. As the city had mentioned, it's a tough neighborhood where this is located. I don't think they get tougher than where this particular block is located. It's just under the CPR underpass on Main Street on the Point Douglas side, in North Point Douglas there. So you can see where the red dot indicates it is. If you look at the Lord Selkirk Park, North Point Douglas area, it's certainly an socioeconomically challenged area with certainly a number of issues, including violent incidents, crime, police involvement, etc. Of various kinds. For further background, I've given you some data from the 2016 Canadian Census. This is the Winnipeg CMA. And the Lord Selkirk Park area. So this is actually we're on page number 10 still.
Oh, sorry, okay.
So the chart is in the middle of the page there. And we're looking at the Canadian Census data. So Winnipeg CMA in comparison to Lord Selkirk Park. Now Lord Selkirk Park is immediately across Main Street, certainly equally tough. I'm not sure if there's any particular difference between the west and the east side of Main Street at that point. What I'm showing here is the socioeconomic issues. So you've got average household income of just under $90,000 in Winnipeg CMA, just under $30,000 in that Lord Selkirk Park area. For occupied dwellings, 67% owned in Winnipeg, 9% in the Lord Selkirk Park area. And that's flipped for rented dwellings, 92% rented in Lord Selkirk, 30% in the Winnipeg CMA. Unemployment rate in the city as a whole, 6.3%, in that 2016 Canadian census, and 23% in that local area. So what I'm illustrating here is the challenges that are in that area, and obviously this impacts rents and desirability of those properties for investors as well. I will note just across the adjoining street, so on the north side of the street, just across from the subject property, I represent that property as well for different ownership. They have had a fire in that location and continual issues with drug issues in the block, constant police presence coming by. They've had to evict numerous people. It's a challenge because the people that you don't want in your blocks don't rent them. They have other people rent them, and then they use that renter as essentially their front to get into your building, or they just come into the building and take over. So due to the nature of the location of the property, these are the challenges that you're facing. I'm not making any comment with regard to those issues. It's simply the location that we're looking at. Now, back to the subject property itself. Again, Manitoba Housing, built in '74. Yes, it's a concrete building, but it is where it is, and it's facing those exact same issues. So we have 90 studio units, quite small units, out of 109 total, 82.5% of the building. Again, this is less than attractive to investors in the marketplace and would draw a significantly higher cap rate. Looking at the condition of the property itself, it's in poor condition. If you look at the photos that we've shown here, you can see some exteriors and interiors. And again, we're showing you a number of suites here for the purpose of giving you an overall condition. It was one of the tougher ones that I've seen. If you look at the bottom of page 6, and this is a good indicator, I think, they had to replace kitchen cabinetry, obviously, in this particular unit, so you can see that the cabinets obviously look newer there, but they don't remain in that condition for long in some circumstances. So again, the wear and tear is much higher. This property has significantly more wear and tear than what you're going to find in other normal market apartments, and indeed many housing properties too. I would consider this towards the lower end of certainly the lower end of condition of the ones that I've viewed. So let's look at the valuation. Again, rent year to income, so we can't rely on that. We looked at CMHC averages, less a deduction for the condition and size of those units. So again, the units are quite on the small side. They're smaller than your typical bachelor. They're more studio sized, as they were termed. So we have used the average rents for that area, less a small deduction for, again, size and condition, and you can see the condition. So this gives us our final projected revenue of $614,551, which I believe is somewhat close to the city's projection. Actual revenue was $357,000 roughly. We have used the 2.4% vacancy rate, and you can see the stabilization of our expenses at the bottom of page 14, where we come to $401,716. Looking at the subject property, it would be, I think you'd be challenged to find a location with more downside than this particular location, which, given the condition of the suite build out, etc., we've applied a 6.75% cap rate to, again, putting a premium onto the cap rate for those issues. And this gives us our final value of $2,935,000. Again, this is a significant step up from the revised 2018 assessment of $2,553,000. And again, if you look in the addenda materials, you'll see numerous decisions supporting this capitalization rate as well. Thank you.
Mr. Lucky, do you have questions?
So, your valuation, I calculate at $26,927 per unit.
Okay. I didn't work the figure out.
Okay, and in the first property that we had, 101 Marion, I submitted as evidence, the last page, 300 block of Selkirk, which I think is the first block of Selkirk. How would you compare those locations?
How would I compare the locations? I've been in the 300 Selkirk property as well.
Right.
Yes, it's on Selkirk, so it's also a tough neighborhood. It's close to, I think, the watchtower there, etc. But if you look at that building and the site and the property itself, it would be superior to the subject.
Twice as good?
I'm not looking at the, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, it sold for $48,000 a unit, so is this one twice as good? Or twice as bad?
Well,
Like, it's right next to the Lord Selkirk Park as well.
It's in a superior condition, and somewhat different situation. I don't know how to answer your particular question. The value that we've done is based on the market stats as presented.
Okay, no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lorando?
No questions.
Ms. McFadden?
I have no questions.
Mudlar? Thank you. So have that upside down. Okay, next one, 145 Powers Street.
We're getting there.
Don't jinx us, okay?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, 145 Powers is file 19-3265, roll number 140-102-41100. We have another Manitoba housing project, property, 12 stories, built in 1975, 100 suites. Okay, sorry. We've used, looks like a model valuation. This would be at a low quality level as well. This would be near Selkirk, not, actually a little west of 300 Selkirk, but our For our income, we've looked at other seniors, some nonprofit, some profit, and arrived at justify our model. As I said, the income and expenses are model generated, and 5.6% is the cap rate, and I would ask that you maintain the assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, do you have questions from the store?
Just it is model generated, as you indicated, this hasn't been adjusted or?
I don't know for sure.
I will look
If somebody tinkered with it, it's hard to tell unless expense ratios are even numbers. But it looks like it's model.
That was my thought.
Yeah.
That's my only question.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lorando,
No questions.
Ms. McFadden.
So would you have made an adjustment to your model for the quality of this building then, if it's a low quality building?
Well, I'm, by the expense ratio, this would be at either below average or poor. Poor is the lowest.
Quite a bit lower than the previous building.
Well, but the previous building was manually adjusted. This one, I can't tell if it was manually adjusted or if it was, if it's all model. The other one, when I saw 65%, that's our cap at expenses, so somebody put max 65%
Right.
and lowered the rent.
So based on on not having looked at these buildings, you can't really comment whether the quality of this building is similar or?
I can tell by the expense ratio that this would be either poor or below average for sure. Most likely poor.
But better than the last one?
Right.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
I guess I do have one question.
Sure.
Have you visited this one?
Pardon me?
Have you visited this building?
Not on the inside. I don't. There's a number of them in that area that I get confused. I've been in some of them. I don't think I've been in this one.
And your market rent, you said you're using, you didn't use CMHC at all, and you just used some of your comparables.
CMHC is part of the due diligence that the modelers use.
Yeah.
They look at what people are reporting as income, what gets fed in, all our INEs that get fed into the system. They temper it with CMHC, and what I've shown you here is actual comparables in or around the area. Around $550 for a bachelor accommodation is fair. About $500, and then when you factor in for these types of buildings, $650, $700 for a one bedroom.
I've got no further questions.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, I think I'm good also, so.
Great, thank you.
You're up.
I'm up. Thank you. So, 145 Powers Street. This is the property we're looking at again. It's Manitoba Housing. Rent geared to income property. You can see the unit split as shown at the bottom of the chart on page number 3. Again, we're looking at 77 out of 100 units being bachelor units. This is because of housing's mandate of housing as many people in need as possible. This is why they're constructed this way. certainly not the standard in the marketplace, and is certainly less desirable from a purchaser point of view, in terms of the rent that one would be able to achieve out of bachelors versus 1 and 2 beds, etc. So, looking at the property, it was built in 1975. We have photographs of it beginning on page number 4, a couple of the exteriors. I'm not sure why we're showing you the parking lot necessarily, but it is there. Again, the institutional nature of the finishes in the hallways, etc. You can see the inside of the units. This one particular unit had a refresh, so you can see newer cabinetry in there and flooring on that kitchen unit. But again, the base nature of the finishes in the typical bathroom and the main areas. We're not looking at carpeting, and it's cinder block walls and very durable, basic finishes essentially. I would believe that the property would be in average condition in my opinion. The site is shown on page number 9 there. Again, it's right on Selkirk essentially. Well, it is on Selkirk. The side street is the actual address, that being 145 Powers, but it fronts on Selkirk itself. And the property location is shown on page number 10. So again, you can see that the property is located within that William White North End area, immediately north of the CPR tracks. And I have the same Lord Selkirk Park area stats to show you immediately above that with regard to the socioeconomic status of that particular area. Obviously, this is going to drive rents. If you look at CMHC averages, the areas that they have are relatively large. So the Lord Selkirk Park, or the Lord Selkirk area that they have for CMHC, is not just the area just north of the tracks there. It's a much larger area, so the averages would take into account properties in areas that would be somewhat superior to the property being located on Selkirk there. Looking at the valuation, as stated, I would say the condition of this particular property at this point in time anyway is average, so we did not change the CMHC averages. We used them as is. So $456 for the bachelors and upwards from there for the 1 and 2 bedrooms. $672, $772. This gives us our projected income of $608,016. CMHC does a pretty thorough job of their statistics. I would not see this being considered to be renting for above average while it's in decent condition. The location obviously has an impact on that as well. 2.4% vacancy has been applied, and you can see our expense stabilization at the bottom of page number 14 with the individual amounts there. We typically include a property management adjustment to our expense allowance. In this case, I have not done that because I felt that it would boost the expense allowance beyond what would be appropriate for market valuation. So we've kept the property management out of it, and our final stabilized expense allowance is $390,736. Looking at capitalization rate, I'm going to make a slight adjustment to my final value here, and I'm going to drop the capitalization rate from 6.5% to 6.25%. Just looking at the general interior condition at this point in time, I think that would be appropriate for the property. Now, that's only one thing that factors into cap rate. The location of the property fronting on Selkirk where it is by and large your overriding factor in determining a cap rate for this. Looking at the rents that can be derived in that area, looking at the suite mix, et cetera, any deferred maintenance that they have on the exterior areas, et cetera. I think 6.25% is certainly appropriate for the subject. 6.5 might be slightly on the high side, just given the suite condition for this. So our final market value comes to $3,243,000. Sorry, that's my presentation. I'm
Thank you. Mr. Lucky, do you have questions for Mr. Smith?
So you were obviously in this building, and you said you were in 300 Selkirk.
I was in 2015 in 300 Selkirk, yes.
So that building that sold for $48,000 a unit, and you're at $32,000. How would they compare?
Well, I'm not making a direct comparison to 300 Selkirk in my evidence.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zorando.
None, thank you.
Ms. McFadden?
The expense rate in this building is, again, 66%. That seems, you said it's average condition, does that not seem somewhat high? Expense ratio?
So when you look at that, and that's the thing with ratios, is they can be somewhat misleading, because the expense of running it is whatever it costs to heat it, and the utilities, plow the snow, etc. And that can vary from building to building depending on efficiency, etc. The R&M for this building ranged between $205,000 and $136,000. Our average, of course, is right in the middle there at 172, 238, which is slightly higher than the 1,000 to 1,500 that one might typically see for R&M. So it's slightly above average. But again, that would be somewhat indicative of Manitoba housing and the wear and tear that they go through. And if you look at the location, it wouldn't be unexpected. And we didn't include an additional amount for property management that one would typically see in the marketplace, because I felt that would drive an inaccurate market value, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have one more matter on the docket, but does anyone need a quick break or anything, or should we just finish it?
Rock and roll.
Okay,
This one has a non-compliance issue.
this one does? Okay, let's take a 5-minute one.
Oh.
Okay, I'm calling the meeting back to order. The next matter on the docket is 355 Charles Street.
File number 19-4332, roll number 14099949800. 355 Charles, we've agreed to accept Mr. Smith's value with non-compliance.
Okay,
What is that?
So, I call it non-compliant. So they wouldn't get
Right, the
they wouldn't
penalty,
get,
right.
the penalty would be enforced, they wouldn't get the first year refund, but they would the second. So the reduction to his number effective 2021.
Okay, and Mr. Smith, you are accepting?
I am, yes, it appears they didn't meet the submission.
Okay, so the value is, if I'm correct, 1,957,000, is that?
Correct.
1,957,000 effective 2021.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
957,000, and that's effective 2021.
Except they'll never go up.
Yeah,
And that's it.
yes, thank you very much, and now
Thank you.
closing the hearing, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great long weekend.
Thank you, you too.
That 5-minute break was worth it.